All right, we are on the air. All praise be to the Most High, giving thanks for another opportunity. I checked the date on part 3. Wow, I was supposed to come back and then a whole lot of other stuff. You know, it's we're in a time where let's just say that time goes very quickly and things come up and I have to read at the most opportune time. So I pray that everybody is well. Sometimes you guys catch it live and sometimes you catch it on the replay. And at whatever time you're catching it, I pray that you are well and that this information is edifying to your experience and your catalog and understanding and all of that good, nice stuff. So definitely we're going into spaces that we wouldn't usually go into. These are not usually, people don't usually be like, I want to quote John Blackford. That's probably, I wouldn't have known anything about the dude. And so if you are just tuning in, we have been reading, this is the 4th installment of a personal journal that was found by John Blackford. And he was an entrepreneur, a businessman, very wealthy planter. And it goes on to speak about how many things he owned in the area, and this is his actual journal that they found on his location. So as we read the preface and the introduction, it was done in shorthand, but it's really giving us a look at the other aspect of slavery that oftentimes, more often than not, the enslaved individual would not have had the ability to see. Hold on one second. And so in this instance, we are able to see a lot of the wealth that people say, hey, it wasn't me, it was my ancestor, but they're not telling you how much wealth they actually accumulated. And the issue as it relates to reparations or what is owed, one would want to imagine that it's no longer there. But where does money really go or wealth really go? Like land doesn't really disappear. It changes ownership, but it doesn't, if you built a house or whatever, that might still be standing. It might not if you built a structure, whatever the case may be. So to assume or to lead one to believe that it has dissipated like the dew, resources is what attributes to wealth. So a lot of the same resources are still here. So that's definitely something to consider. We're going to pick up on page 6. I want to apologize for my delay in coming back. As I said, sometimes stuff call my attention and I got to go into some deep research and it's kind of hard to switch gears for me sometimes. But I've been hanging on. So if you miss we had Brother Kanok from Israel Family Farm. If you missed that, check it out. Some good information, and definitely we'll have the brother back speaking about urban farming. Without no further ado, let's get into some of our foreparents who knew very well the concept of farming, something that we have just a few generations later been removed from, and many people are making that move back. So page 6, Miss Hargrave called this doctor. Sorry, again, let me make it bigger so that sometimes the glare. This one, I don't have the book. I usually like to read from the book because the glare of the computer be messing up your eyes. But Mrs. Hargrave called the morning doc Perrin, remained to dinner, as did Mrs. Hargrave. Dr. Smith arrived while we were at dinner. So remember, a lot of people are always stopping through his house. A lot of people are always coming for dinner, some staying upwards of a month plus. So he was kind of a social, or his environment or his household was a social stop. So imagine those who worked with him or for him for free, so or who are made to work for him, you always had to be prepared. So this was, if you was a cook in this house, you can only imagine. It says, spent an hour and returned home. Murph and Enoch hauled 2 logs to the sawmill and brought over some paling stuff. Will cut some wood, but put off the stuff for paling. Miss Hargrave returned home in the evening. Mary Miller here. Miss B is much better. Miss B is his wife. Better Murph and Enoch hauled some rails together this afternoon. He's talking about all of the dealings of his house once again. And we learned earlier, because I know it's been some days, so I'm trying to catch us up or refresh our memory, that he hired quote black people free. He also hired Europeans that were in and around him, indentured servitude. So he was quite of like an equal opportunity employer. The weather continues fine, changed a little cooler. Ned and Jupe in the boat, a very small business. 10th Wednesday, weather changed, cooler, a white frost last night. JK called this morning, brought my bags home. Miss Miller came, Murph and Enoch hauling rails together in woods. Miss McFarlane came over and Little John. Both remained all night. Miss Miller returned home after supper. Will cut some hickory wood, brought a small load home. Widows called to know about cutting wood. The weather is quite cold, begin freezing before sunset. I have been writing on my books, Ned and Jupe in the boat. And I think, remember, he owned the ferry. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Ned and Jupe are his servitude, his slaves, who he allows to run the boat without much supervision. It says the 11th of Thursday, weather has changed much colder. The last night frost quite hard. Doc Parent called this morning. Miss B, his wife who's sick, is mending, is still confined to her bed. Miss Eaton or Mrs. Eaton came over. Mrs. McFarlane and her son John was here all night. Like, people just drop by, stay at the crib, no telephone, just come and stay. Jay Node called this morning and called again, like we keep saying, as they visited him. Left his account for boarding some hands, which I credit to him. A young man left an account for Adam Licklider for mending harness, and amount $8.87. Half Murph went out after late breakfast with wagon to haul rails. He broke off the wagon tongue, brought home a load hickory wood, which will cut. There has come 7 lambs, one of which perished last night. Sent Enoch to Sharpsburg. Had my mare and Bob horse shod. Brought some beef from Colonel Miller. Called on Mrs. Nate, or he has Nafe here. And they're giving us the decoding of it. It says Miss McFarlane, sometimes written McFarlane or McFarlane, and members of her family of Shepherdstown were frequent visitors at Ferry Hill. And again, the Plantation House, I believe, if we read, it's a historic site and it's still there. Isaac Widows of Shepherdstown was a day laborer hired by Blackford as a woodcutter and field hand. Blackford kept an account book of his ferry, another of his dealings with the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, a record of his justice of peace activities, and a consolidated financial record. So this dude is showing you wealth because he has multiple streams of income. He just doesn't depend on the ferry. He cuts wood from off his property. You understand? He's over here writing books. He's a justice of the peace. So none of these books are known to exist because he said he was writing in his books. Occasionally, some of Blackford's hired laborers ate their meals with Node, who rented his farm and house from Blackford. When they did so, Blackford credited the board bill to Node's account. Adam Licklider, who ran a leather and harness shop in Shepherdstown, patronized by Blackford, had difficulty in collecting this bill, with Blackford characterized as an extravagant harness mending account. He finally paid it on May 10th. And lastly, they tell us Miss Nate, also known Miss Neff, who lived in Shepherdstown, was a seamstress often employed at Ferry Hill. She and her daughter were accepted socially at Ferry Hill, where they often visited and dined with other guests at other people's account. No, I just put that in there, but they did dine at other people's account. But anyway, let me continue because I've been so late to doing this, I can't give too much commentary. So let me continue. It says here, Miss Moore, if you just joined us and you have no idea what we're talking about, you might have to go to episodes 1, 2, and 3, of which this book is not a normal narrative. It's a journal, and it was his private journal. It's written in shorthand, and the link is in the box if you want to follow along. We're on page 7, and he's saying all the activities that went on. He was a slave master as well as an employer, and he's talking about everything that would happen in his daily occurrence. And by the way, he had buku do for that space and time. Even today, for a lot of people, he will have a lot of money. So Miss Morrison, widows called again. Mrs. McFlaren gone home this evening. Ned and Jupe in the boat. Poor business. So he's like, the ferry is not making money. John Bryan has been very ill, is getting better. The 12th, Friday. Weather cold, froze hard last night. Isaac Widows came home, commenced cutting wood. I went out and shooed him a lot, then rode through the woods to where JK was cutting firewood. A horse sent for Mary Miller. She went home. Mrs. Eaton here. Dr. Parent called. Miss B sat up some. Liquor lids, Lick Litter's young man called, wants money for the accounts he left yesterday. Murph and Enoch getting out clover seed with 9 horses and the revolving machine. Franklin writing, and again, they accounted for his misspelling. Again, if this was a quote black person, they would have called him illiterate. Because this is his personal journal, we already read through all of the ways in which they tried to account for all of his misspellings and his shorthand. So just understand, if you're looking at it, he's misspelling a lot of words, and they're saying he was a very educated man, but he was rushed in his diary entries. Franklin riding with an E, the Bay, Miracle Rolls, Will cutting wood and taking care of the stock, Ned and Jupe in the boat, done, but poor business record. The Patriot of 10th and 11th. So it's funny how he lets them go out to the boat, but he keeps talking about how poor the business is. So I don't know who he's trying to blame for the poor business of the boat, but I find that very interesting. 13th, Saturday, weather clear, more moderate and pleasant. Franklin Cole has rode my mare to Sharpsburg. Murph and Enoch treading the clover seed. Enoch took a bag corn to mill. Will cut some wood. Miss V. Swearingen and Mrs. Henry called and spent a few minutes. Miss Berry came over and brought some cake and jelly for Miss B. Will haul a load wood with the ox cart. For Franklin in the evening, Martin Shellman called to say he wants to come on Monday to cut timber. Sent $1.25 to buy sugar, coffee, and pepper. Now, $1.25 would not buy sugar, coffee, and pepper today. Ned and Jupe in the boat has been a very poor business done this week. Again, every day he keeps complaining about them. Miss Eaton here, she came on Thursday. Enoch took one other bag, white corn, to the mill, brought a bag of cornmeal home. Miss B is recovering her strength and health. A lot of activity, very, very busy. 14th of Sunday, morning clear cold, a white frost. I arose this morning with unpleasant feelings. Swimming, giddiness in my head with my stomach affected, eat no breakfast. Helena and William gone to Sharpsburg to meeting. Elizabeth and JK's wife called, eat dinner, spent a short time with Miss B, who was recovering. Daphne and Isaiah came. Isaiah returned in the evening. He rode the Dr. Gray horse, took with him a bag of full sausage or fall sausage and 3 chickens from C. Knowles. Sally Williams came in the evening and spent the night. I took 4 of the Brendrift pills going to bed. Ned and Jupe in the boat, very little doing, no traveling. So to update us, they say Miss Morrison was the wife of Reverend J.H. Morrison, an Episcopal minister in Sharpsburg. John McPherson Bryan was the owner of a forge and nail factory and blacksmith shop connected with Antietam Iron Works. Blackford patronized Bryan's shop and sold Bryan timber and sand. Blackford followed some time-worn methods of threshing grain, but also made use of horsepower threshing machines. Martin Shellman of Shepherdstown was employed intermittently throughout the year, although Blackford, exasperated with his constant and excessive use of whiskey, often threatened to dismiss him. At one time, he persuaded Shellman to give up the use of whiskey and expressed the view that Shellman was cured. Alas, a short time later, Shellman was drunk again. And we read like 2 episodes ago or episode ago that he complained of the slaves and the hired labor being smoking and drinking all the time, but he also and coming to work drunk. Okay. And so again, remember, we're reading out of the mind of this European who is a slave master. So you're looking at his thoughts, what's important to him. And right now, the most thing that's important to him is money, business, enterprise. So basically they're saying that Shellman was drunk. And we read before that he had complaints, again, like I said, of drunk people. At the same time, he was providing the spirits, so to say, for them to be inebriated and drunk. Let's continue. Monday morning, the 15th, windy, which sprang up some time before day. The pills I took operated before day, which sickened and gave me unpleasant feelings. Isaac Widows came over to cut wood. He broke the crank of my grindstone. I conclude he is very trifling. Sally Williams left after breakfast. Doc Paran called. Murph and Enoch are clearing or cleaning clover seed. Will cutting wood. I have been engaged all day, all this day, mending the crank of the grindstone that widows broke. This day has been very pleasant. I received no paper by this night's mail. This is the second failure within 2 weeks. Ned and Jupe in the boat gave Ned $1.50 to pay for blanket, which he bought, I suppose is BT dot. So I suppose he's trying to say bought, of Lane and Webb. 16th, Tuesday, morning pleasant. I took 4 pills. So now this dude, like those who we see today, those who some people envy, they're business people, they're high officials, they're CEOs, they're presidents, but internally something is not off. So at this space in time, dude is on pills. He says, I took 4 pills last night, which sickened me this morning when they commenced operating. Martin Shellman came, ate his breakfast, and him and Will went out to cut shingle timber. Mr. Kirk called, wanted poplar plank, and to send the warehouse in S-Town, a Homeric house, called to request me to make out my account against the paper or the packet koi for ferrage, which I have done amount $11.75 to send to Mr. W.M. Short. Mrs. Naif came after breakfast. Murph and Enoch, working at the Clover Seed, sent the Pecoy account to Mr. Short by Ned. I finished posting my books. Mrs. Neff took 2 coats to make home with her. Ned and Jupe in the boat, but little doing. He's still complaining. You don't know anything else about the life of the enslaved except for how they relate to him and what money they may be costing him or making him. 17th, Wednesday, morning, cloudy, a small sprinkle of rain. Still warm for season, clears off and is as warm as May Day. Morrison came down, engaged to cut wood next week. I rode out to the woods. Shellman and Will cutting and sawing shingle timber. Isaac Widow, who he said was trifling, by the way. It says here, where are we? Isaac Widows cutting cord wood. Martin boarding at JK's. I rode down to JK's Nicholas, called to settle and engage the house for the next year. Added up his account and find he owes me $16.22 and a half, including his house rent, which is $20. Murph and Enoch working at the Clover Seed. Jacob Miller called, wants some timber, which I granted him privilege to cut on my land. I have counted this day 22 suckings, pigs, and 5 lambs. Murph reported that he has cleaned up 11 1/4 clover seed and put it in bag. Ned and Jupe in boat, light business. This is not going to be one of those this is going to be some left brain activity. So for those of us who are used to and accustomed to a lot of the emotional side of the slavery narrative, we're not going to get that. So definitely, please bear with us. This is numbers and crunching. He sounds like an accountant. I'm going to double back here as they give us the explanation. Daphne and Isaiah, slaves at Ferry Hill. So when he talks about Isaiah, widows, he's a slave, and Daphne is a slave. Often visited and worked for Dr. and Mrs. Otho James Smith of Bonesborough. On numerous occasions, they took supplies from Ferry Hill to the Smiths. He says Brandeurth pills were a very popular patent medicine. A Shepherdstown newspaper advertised them as an effective listen to this, as an effective remedy for consummation. No, are they trying to say constipation? Okay, I don't know if they spelled that correctly. Consumption, influenza. Maybe I wanted to say constipation. For consumption, influenza, colds, indigestion, and headache. It declared that 9 million boxes had been sold in 5 years, period, and that more than 300,000 patients have been cured of their ills by the use of the pills. Now, keep in mind, at this time, they was doing some wild stuff. Even a little bit after this time, the drug industry was totally unregulated. And of course, we know Coca-Cola really had Coke in there. Sears Roebuck catalog, if you look at the history of drugs in America, it's a documentary, plus other things. You'll see that they used to sell heroin. They used to sell the actual needle for injection. They used to prescribe, like I said, Coke, and for things of like for children. It used to be in cough syrup. And so, there was a lot of addiction in the late 1800s, early 1900s. So for them to be saying, they sold 900,000, no, I mean 9 million boxes, I really want to know what was in those pills. But anyway, Lane and Webb was a merchandising firm in Shepherdstown, often patronized by Blackford. As this entry shows, Blackford did not distribute clothing to his slaves as a group at stated periods, but purchased or permitted the slaves to purchase for themselves, for each slave individually as the need arose. I don't know how he made that a generality when we only saw one reference. I find it interesting. It says, as this entry shows, Blackford did not distribute clothing to his slaves as a group at stated periods. How do we know that? How do we know that this wasn't a one-off situation? How do you have one witness of something and then say that he wasn't like the rest of the slave masters? He gave everybody their own money. I don't buy that, but we'll continue. The Packet Company operated a line of boats on the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal from Georgetown to Williamsport, Maryland. It unloaded goods at Ferry Hill to be ferried across the Potomac to Shepherdstown on the Virginia side. Herrick House was a boatman, Short an official of the company. Again, let me go down here. More of this. Let me see. Bear with me 1 minute in case anybody has any questions or comments so I can make sure I'm seeing the screen. An official of the company. All right. So if you have any questions or comments as we're reading, feel free to do it. Bless up yourself, Sister Angel. Good to see you. And yes, I'm back. We've been getting sucked into a whole lot of research here, but we're going to continue. The 18th, Thursday. Weather is remarkably warm for this season of the year. Franklin and Helena sat out for Boone's on horseback after an early breakfast. And why does he keep spelling breakfast B-R-E-C-K? Anywho, breakfast gave Helena $1.50, sent Enoch with the cart and wagon to Sharpsburg to have shafts and a tongue. Murph commenced getting out wheat. Will assisted Martin Shellman to fall and saw single timber. That was another one of his businesses. There was a second failure in my newspaper, none by the last night's mail. Received a letter from Amanda Shepard, dated November. Springfield, Elenas F. and his sister returned after sunset. Report that Catherine Miller went and returned with them. Ned complaining, say he is troubled with great heat in his abdomen and thighs. Mrs. B, remember, Ned is the slave. So let's see what he does. He said Ned is coming to him and complaining about great pain in his abdomen and thighs. I want to say this too about as we're reading the slave master's account of how he viewed the slaves and their conversation, the space that a lot of our people have come into is that complaining space, the place of being disempowered, the space of having to ask someone to resolve your issues. A lot of this mentality was broken into the individual, that you were not allowed to take care of your own affairs to a certain degree, and that you had to pass everything through master, whether you're going to get married, whether you can go visit your wife if you have an abroad marriage. All of these things had to be mediated by your master. So when we look at today's terminology, and a lot of people, again, still feeling disenfranchised, it's not just because, oh, you're lazy and you don't want to do anything for yourself. The system has conditioned the mind to complain to master and for master to fix or resolve your issues. But anywho, Ned complaining, saying, this is not all, but this is a lot of the epigenetics of what we're seeing in this space and time. It says, Ned complaining, say he is troubled with great heat in his abdomen and thighs. Miss B has sat up a part of the day in her room, Ned and Jupe in the boat. So Ned is not feeling good, but Ned is still going to work. Friday, the 19th. Cloudy and raining, has rained during the night. The wind shifted and blew from north and west and north, ceased rain about 9 o'clock. Murph and Enoch in the barn getting out wheat. Will gone to assist Martin, saw shingle timber. Widows not at work want something to eat. Remember, Isaac Widows is another slave. So it says, widows not at work. He wants something to eat. I walked out where Martin and Will are at work, found a young lamb dead, which is the 7th that has come. Colonel Miller's boy came for the bull. The weather has changed much colder this evening. Murph reports that he has, I don't know what this word is, mascones 850 sheaves of wheat this day and yesterday. I'm informed that Caroline pilfered money from Helena. I received by mail this evening two papers, the 15th and the 16th, 17th and 18th, and missing the 12th and the 13th. So he's very anal. Like this dude is like, I didn't get my paper, this, that, and the third. Ned and Jupe in the boat, small receipts, quite cold this evening. Everybody has to report to him. How is he knowing all this stuff? He's only one person. Is he going out there visiting everybody, or is everybody checking in with the quote boss to let him know where he is and what they're doing? It says on the 20th, no, before we get to the 20th, it says, to recap, George Nicholas, a woodcutter and farm laborer at Ferry Hill, rented a house in Shepherdstown owned by Blackford. Jacob Miller, a carriage maker of Shepherdstown, not to be confused with Colonel John Miller of Sharpsburg. Amanda and her husband, Tom Shepherd, had sold their farm to Blackford and removed to Illinois. Blackford kept a blooded bull, which he left his friends and neighbors use to improve their cattle. I don't know what a blooded bull is. No longer in common use is the verb mask, meant to beat or thresh, hence to beat the grain from the sheaves of wheat. Caroline was a young slave girl. So when we read, I am informed that Caroline pilfered money from Helena, I guess this is an old school word. I guess he said beg, but I'm going to look up pilfered right now, if he even spelled it correctly. Oh, chill. Pilfer, to steal. Oh, and pilfer, to steal, especially small quantities. All right. So I like learning. So he's trying to say that she stole in small quantities money from Helena. All right. Let me go back here. So Caroline pilfered money from Helena. All right. And so Caroline is a young slave girl. So let's continue. The 20th, Saturday, the weather clear, morning cool. The ground slightly froze this morning. Franklin called, got the Bill Gray mare to ride to Boonesboro. Gave him $2.50 to purchase sugar, coffee, and ink. Murph and Enoch getting out wheat. Will assisting M. Shellman to cut shingle timber. They broke the handle of the saw. Sent Enoch for wagon and cart and sent the saw to have mended. Franklin returned from Boonesboro, brought sugar, coffee, and ink. Paid for them $2 and 12 1/2 lick litter, sent again for the amount of his extravagant harness mending account. Miss Eaton left, gone to S-Town. Elizabeth came up with the child. And I think Elizabeth is his daughter, or one of his daughters, if I'm not mistaken. I bought half bilsha of oysters and a string of perch, paid 37 1/2. Murph reports 500 sheaves got out this day. Shellman called a few minutes this evening. Enoch brought the wagons home, the cart, and saw not done. Ned and Jupe in the boat. Okay. 21st, Sunday. Morning cloudy. Looks like snow might soon fall. The air is cold. It froze last night. A white frost this morning. And a ewe had twins last night. One of the lambs dead this morning. And of course, we know they're out there and it's cold. And the young lambs, the young ewes are being born. Then they can't deal with the temperature. He's reporting that it's cold and a lot of them are dying. So this to me is in association with the weather. But anyway, this morning, C Note and little Elizabeth and child came, spent the day. I don't know if Elizabeth is his daughter. I could be mistaken. If anybody remembers, please remind me. Why did he call if that's his daughter, why is he calling the grandson or the grandchild just child? It says, and little son Elizabeth and child came, spent the day, dined with us on P fowl. Miss B is still confined to bed. She sits up some little. Michael Swinger came. He's very what's the word I'm looking for? He's very disconnected from, even he's calling his wife Miss B. So he seems like he's very distant from all that's happening around him emotionally. It says, Michael Swinger called after candlelight, has been down at J. No's saying he's in search of Comment Stone. that wants to engage to take down the canal. He gave me to understand that wish to stay all night. I showed him to bed. Little Miss Pinnell stayed with Helena. William slept in the room with them. Ned and Jupe in the boat. So is Ned and Jupe like always in the boat? Like, do they have breaks? Like, do they get off the boat at any time? Because these dudes are always in the boat in all of his references here. 22nd of Monday, 22nd Monday. Weather, morning clear and cool, froze some little during the last night. Michael Swinger remained for breakfast, went out to examine the cement stone. I am to write to him stating the price. I will take Mr. PR Preach or Peach for the privilege to quarry them. Dr. Paran called to see Mrs. B. That's the doc, yeah, doctor. James Elgin called wants to team to haul a load lime from Sharpsley Kiln. Helena wrote to her brother Henry, sent Enoch to Sharpsburg for the cart, sent $1 to purchase sugar. Murph treading out wheat. Will gone to the woods to help Shellman, who is not there but at Sharpsburg, drunk. Jonathan Miller called, eat his dinner, and I paid him for making 2,640 shingles, $8.27. The dude made 2,640 shingles, and he paid $8.27. In today's times, that can't even buy you like some fast food. It says Shellman brought the saw from Sharpsburg. Him and Miller went down to the Ferry house. I rode out to show 2 free Negroes where to cut wood. Again, people kept coming to him. He said 4 Germans called, want to cut wood to cut. So free quote Negroes come to him, Germans, they said Irish, and different people looking for work. Will has cut some wood. Murph has done sheaves, 500. Enoch returned with the cart at dark. Ned and Jupe in the boat. Small business. Ned and Jupe does not get a break. Apparently, last time we saw Ned's stomach was hurting, but it really didn't matter. There was a quarry on the plantation. This is what they're telling us. But for some reason, Blackford refused to sell the lime, or as Blackford called it, cement, stone to Michael Swigger or Swigart of D.C. James Elgin of Shepherdstown was a business associate of Franklin and a friend of the Blackford family. Henry V.S. Blackford, second son of John, was student at the Mercksburg, Pennsylvania Academy. To me, it sounds like these dudes always wanted a free meal, yo. They kept coming through like, oh, they stopped for dinner and a free place to crash. Because this is what it seems like. Who was washing all those sheets? Who was cooking all that food? Who was tending to all of these guests? 23rd, Tuesday, weather clear, morning, cold, a large white frost, the ground slightly froze. Received 2 papers by the last night's mail, which gives the number. The 12th and 13th has been detained until last night it came with 19th and 20th. Murph and Enoch getting out wheat. Will helping Martin, who he says has resumed his work. Helena gone to S-Town, gave her $2 to purchase some small articles. Received a letter from Josh I. Merrick, enclosed one from A. Barnes to him on the 13th. INST, he abbreviated here, have got out 500 sheaves this day. Windows and 2 free Negroes cutting cordwood. Priscilla Miller came home with Helena M. Shellman, called sober, wants tobacco. So the person who he says usually comes through, drunk, they're sober, but now they want a little smoke. Gave Will 12 and a half to buy him some. Ned and Jupe in the boat. I'm sorry. Monday, you know that song? Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Every day of the week, these dudes is in the boat. 24th, Wednesday. Weather continues moderate, freezing at night and thawing in the day. Murph and Enoch get out 400 sheaves. The day before, they got out 500 sheaves. And the day before that, it was 500 sheaves. So now they got out another 400 sheaves of wheat, and in all, 2,700 sheaves. Quit and caned up. Franklin and Enoch hauled him a load firewood. Will hung up in the smokehouse, the port of our first butcher, 18 hogs, making 108 pieces of ham, shoulder, and Maldens took down pieces. Old bacon, which he placed in hog shed, sold Isaac widows one side, 10 and one half. a 10 cents a pound. Mrs. Jewett, his daughter, no, her daughter, and Mrs. Welcons called, spent some time, and returned home. Martin Shellman split in Shinglewood. Widows and the two free Negroes cutting wood, I rode out to see them in the evening. A young man called with S. Scott's account, which he left amount $13.12. One half. Ned and Jupe, come on. Can you guess where Ned and Jupe is on the 24th Wednesday? Ned and Jupe in the boat. Small business. Hey Kyle, how are you doing today? I'm doing well. Give thanks. Thank you. We're reading John Blackford, Ferry Hill Plantation Journal. This is a business journal that wasn't expected to be found or to be read by, quote, descendants of those who were enslaved. This was his shorthand notes of his daily business and how he run his plantation and really what the happenings of what was happening on the plantation. He's out of Virginia. He owned the Ferry Hill. If you look it up, it was a large thing. I believe the building is still there today. And so we're actually looking at a piece of history that for the most part will not be pulled out and examined. So again, for all those who are about reparations, this is the kind of work that needs to be done to find out who had the money, where did the money go, and who has the money or the resources, the finances, the wealth today. So John Blackford, here we go. And Ned and Jupe is always in the boat. So once again, welcome, Brother Kyle. The 25th day, which is a Thursday. Weather changed, first fair, then cloudy, then fair and pleasant. Mrs. and Mrs. and Miss Gibbon and Mrs. Hammond called to see Mrs. B. Spent but a few minutes. Uriah Snowed, his wife, and David Knowles called Murph and Enoch and Caroline cleaning wheat. Will cutting and sawing shingle timber with Martin Shellman. The bay Mare Bill had a nail in her hind foot, which I drew out. Uriah's K and wife went home after dinner. David rode down to see Franklin and Joseph Node returning this evening. Miss Priscilla Miller is here since Tuesday. There is at this 8 lambs. Murph and Enoch finished passing the wheat twice through the windmill, which does not make it clean. Enoch brought 5 bags from J Nodes. Ned and Jupe in the boat. This day, the weather has been fine, spring weather. Now imagine Ned and Jupe is always in the boat, even when the weather is cold, even when it's rainy, Ned and Jupe is always in the boat. They are the slaves of Mr. Blackford. Give me 1 second here. I'll be right back. All right, I have to check on the little ones. Anytime they get quiet, you got to find out what's going on. What's going on? All right, let's see here. Let's keep reading, shall we? For some, good evening, LJ. I'm just tuning in, so I have to catch up. Okay, no problem, sis. Yeah, again, yeah, this is part 4. So we did a lot of the preface and the introduction, and so you definitely have to catch up and see what's going on. This is not like you're not going to hear a lot of the beatings, a lot of the emotion. You're not going to hear that. These are just what some would say records. Records, money, accounts, business. So this is the other side of the institution. Like they said, it was economics. So how can we talk about slavery without talking about economics? All right. Weather changed, first fear that, okay, I read that one. It says Joseph I. Merrick, a well-known lawyer and businessman in Hagerstown, Maryland, was Blackford's business agent and attorney. A. Barnes of Baltimore was heavily indebted to Blackford. Barnes finally became bankrupt, and Blackford lost a large sum of money he had lent him. Priscilla Miller, intimate friend of Helena Blackford and a frequent guest at Ferry Hill. Samuel Cost, a merchant of Boonesboro, with whom Blackford did business. Uriah Snow and his brother David were relatives of Mrs. Blackford. So this is just explaining some of the people who kept coming through. It says here on page 12, if you're following along, the link is in the box. We're on page 12 of the PDF or the, HTML form. And we're at the 26th of Friday. Weather remarkable, moderate, and as mild as spring. A sprinkle of rain fell during the night. Dave Noel remained all night and left here after breakfast for his brother Urias. Murph and Enoch measured up 68 and 1/4 wheat, it being what was out of 2,700 sheaves. He sat out with it for Moman's mill. Franklin has gone on with him to see it measured. Miss Swearingen, Henry, and Miss McFarlane came. Little George, taken strangely with fainting spell, quite insensible for a short time. Suppose worms to have caused the spell. Mrs. S. and Mrs. Henry went home after they supped. Mrs. McFarlane remained. Her son John came both to spend the night. Rebecca Neff brought Murph's and Ned's coat with her mother. Has made 8 hands cutting in the clearing, including William and Martin Franklin. Reports that there is brought from S. Muma's mill 2 bales, I believe, of fine flour, 15.95 with brand. 1, it says BBL of the flour changed to FB Ned and Jupe in the boat. He always ends with Ned and Jupe in the boat. That's what I'm gonna call this dude. But I want to just for us to use some cognitive reasoning or some deduction. If so many people are visiting his location, he would be a hub for information. Because at this time, this is why he's fiending for these newspapers, because the newspapers are transmitting information, and those who are coming in and out of his house are transmitting information. So I think it's very interesting that he's not going into the depth of what is happening in and around him. He's not going into the politics. He's just really focusing on his own business, so to say. But his location would have been a place where a lot of information would have been transmitted, because what else are they doing over dinner, over breakfast, staying for 2, 3, 4 days? They're talking. And so even a lot of people who were in the South, when you see the rise of abolition, when you see this stuff happening, they were having these conversations of what's going on, what should we do, what measures should we take. We should now make it, because there was a point in time where, yeah, they didn't want the enslaved to read, but then there was also a point in time where they made it a point that they're going to enforce these laws as it related to reading. And Virginia was one of the forerunners. South Carolina, Georgia, all the people started following after. So this social intercourse, if you will, was the way in which their fears were transmitted one to another, their concerns were transmitted one to another. Sometimes the house servants, of course, there would have had to been a number of them around. They would have been hearing these things. So, again, he's giving a dry snapshot, but if we just pause on some of the information he's given us, there is a lot going on here. The 27th is Saturday. Weather, morning cloudy and commenced at 8 o'clock to snow, hail, and rain altogether. Murph and Daft unloaded the wagon and put the bran away and dealt the BBL flour to Franklin. They went to hauling plank and paling from the sawmill. Isaac Widows came from the wood cutting wanting money or an order. I gave him neither. Miss McFarlane, her son, Miss Naff, and Miss P. Miller all here. It has changed to snow in turn, and that very fast, all the afternoon. Shellman came up in the evening. He is pretty well soaked. Wanted an order for a shirt. I gave little George a dose of calomel last night, 5 grains, and castor oil this morning. He has discharged worms and is quite pert. Ned and Jupe in the boat. Seasoned, snowing at dark, and no more fell at night. He used another old English, I suppose, word. I know it probably means alert. Let me see here. Did he say he was? He said the little boy was Peart. Hold on. I have a thing with words, people, so just please bear with me. Sometimes you see, because, oh man, hold on. I don't know, my computer's bugging out. I'll look up pert in a minute. It probably means aware, but my computer's bugging out, so I'll keep going. It says here, the 27th, Saturday, weather morning cloudy. No, wait a minute. We read that. The 28th, Sunday, weather is moderate. So when did they have a break? When was break time at his farm? Sunday, weather is moderate, though the ground is covered with snow. It is not cold. Some wind, clouds, and the wind blowing, some from northwest. Rebecca Naft walked home before breakfast this morning. Martin came up from Franklin's, is a little drunk. The two free Negroes went off for Sharpsburg. J. Noel rode up, ate dinner, and spent the afternoon. Miss McFarland and son, John and Miss P. Miller, are here. Could not well leave on account of the snow. Will reports a ewe to have 2 lambs last night under the straw house. The snow is very much reduced in the course of the day by the wind and sun. It appears like freezing tonight. Miss B has sat up most of this morning. Ned and Jupe in the boat. Ned and Jupe in the boat. For those who remember, we read the story of Aaron. And Aaron's story was kind of like this. The read was kind of like this, where it's not like a fluid narrative. But the wild thing, if you didn't hear about Aaron's story, it's on here, so you can look it up, is that he couldn't read or write. And he wanted his story. He was an enslaved individual who got to freedom. And he so much wanted his story to be heard that he walked around asking everybody to write a chapter for him or write a paragraph for him as he dictated to them. So that the stick-to-itiveness and the desire for him to have his story written was so real that he asked people as favors to do this for him, those who were literate, a lot of them being European. I just had to say that because this read is reminding me of that. But 29th, Monday, weather changed. Cold, the last night froze, and this morning the wind has sprang up and is now blowing. Cold from northwest. Franklin called up, gave him a door latch and fixing for one of the doors of the Ferry house. Martin Shellman ground his axe directly, willed to take the last killing of pork out of the hog shred, preparatory to hanging it up to smoke. Gave to John McFarland Mr. Deary's account with an order of George Reynolds for 1140. Him and his mother left here after dinner. I know I keep commenting. For those who are reading along, you're seeing his errors. And so, even if for shorthand, the master in the eyes of the people is supposed to be this infallible being, this deified type individual who has all the power in his hands. So to see this quote master, this rich man who people apparently revered him in his day and came to his house and did all these things, to see so many typographical errors when he thinks no one is watching, you see the humanity in this individual. It says, Will went to the woods to cut after taking out of the meat. Martin went out to split wood for Franklin Murph, and Enoch resumed getting out wheat with the revolving machine and horses. Have got out 750 sheaves. J.K.'s wife sent the girl up with some tripe for Mrs. B, who has sat up most of this day, most spelled M-O-A-S-T, and is recovering rapidly from her illness. There was no paper by this evening mail. Isaiah came home in the stage from Boonesboro. Ned and Jupe in the boat. Very small receipts from the ferry. So it says George was a young slave. So George enters the scene. And Rebecca Neff was the daughter of Blackford's seamstress. So there we have it. The 30th, Tuesday. Weather morning, cold, cloudy. He's a weatherman too, by the way. He's a meteorologist. Has the appearance of snow. Will hanging up, I'm messing around, in the smokehouse, the last butchering of pork of 16 hogs, which was butchered the 28th of December. Martin Shellman is drunk and not doing any work. Old Nicholas came. He is not sober. Says he came from the wood cutting. complains of it being too cold to work. So anytime somebody says something, anytime a servant comes and explains something to him, it's they're complaining. Listen to the language, listen to the verbiage. Some little snow fell about 12 o'clock, then ceased. I'm informed of Belle Mare's situation. Suppose she has the lockjaw, which would be, I believe, tetanus. Franklin bled her. This is one of their practices, bleeding people. She is very bad, must die, I suppose. So this is the bear. Actually, it's a mare. Sorry, so it's a horse. The horse has tetanus, and they bled the horse. Well, they did that to people too, so that's why my bad. Mr. Raw called, wants to borrow money. Will hauled a load of wood with the ox cart from Fran Murph, and Enoch getting out wheat. Isaiah pounding hominy, which would be corn or grits. Sent him to S Town, brought coffee, paid $1, and brought shoes twice. JS's wife called, spent some time, supped with us, and then went home. I hope you guys are sticking with us. Let me check and make sure everybody is okay as we continue here. And then he's finally going to get us to February. So this is the 31st, I believe, of December or January, whatever it is. Weather, it's a Wednesday, weather cold, morning calm. The Belle Mare died last night, occasioned from a snail which she by some means got into her near hind foot. 5 or 6 days since Murph and Enoch getting out wheat, Will gone to woods to cut wood. Isaiah widows, who he always says is drunk and trifling, called and begged me for 2 bushel of corn. Say his family has no bread. A man from the forage called, wants wood to cut. I wrote a letter to Michael Swigert. Welch called, says he worked 15 and a half days at the sheds and 6 at Ferry House at $1 per day, is $15.50, nailed on 6,800 shingles on the barn and smokehouse at Shepherd's Farm, which charged 25 cents per hundred or $2.50 per thousand, and pulled off the old roof amount 1,700, in all $32.50. It sounds wild, doesn't it? Like that is what you pay to reshingle your whole joint. Murph and Enoch report they gave out 1,650 sheaves. William reports that Nicholas skinned the bay mare and Murph hauled her to the woods. Gave Murph a new coat. Lindsay Martin Shellman at Sharpsburg drunk. And come on, guys, I know you know what the end of that day's entry in. The end of the day's entry, Ned and Jupe in the boat. Is weather is cold, Ned and Jupe in the boat. It's raining, Ned and Jupe in the boat. It says Francis Drury was a schoolmaster in Boonesborough to whom Blackford later sent his son, William. Let me see what's going on here. We are going to take our time, work our way down through. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to do so or share. If you like to read in upcoming sessions, you know, I noticed in the beginning, people was like, yeah, we're going to read them on the, and then I don't see nobody reading, but it's all good. I'll keep reading because I like reading. I like reading. We're going to read a few more pages. February 1838. So we're looking at 1830s. This is the time of the question of slavery, abolition and rising, working your way towards civil war. So this is a very interesting time for him to be operating in. One second. All right, first Thursday, weather continues cold, cloudy this morning. Looks likely to snow. Franklin and J. Elgin called 2-1 number of the encyclopedia. Catherine and Mary Miller came. Nicholas M. called, let him have 2 side of old bacon. 8.5 with Murph and Enoch treading out wheat. Will gone to the wood cutting. There is none but him and George Nicholas and his man cutting, so reports Nicholas. Catherine and Mary Helena and Priscilla Miller, all 4 women, went down to Franklin's to eat oysters, return and dine. Then the girls sat off. F and Elgin went with them. F rode my mare, I guess Franklin. His wife is at her father's, went there last evening. Carpenter gave him 56 cents for work done sometime since Franklin and Eglin returned from Sharpsburg, brought the dog Wallace that went with Shellman, who is there drunk for the last 2 days. Ned and Jupe in the boat. Very little done. Second Friday, weather changeable morning. Snowing some little, then quite. SM Hit called, offers his farm in Virginia, asks $60 per acre. He paid me $60.37 on account of premium, which should have been $120.63, three-fourths by calculation. Will gone to wood to cut. I see by a meme which I made that the all four had from S. Hit was 1,343 with Franklin came, says Elizabeth. Has returned, lent him $5. The red white-faced cow had a heifer last night in the stable. Enoch gone with the ox cart to haul some wood for Franklin. The river is frozen over below the landing. Murph and Enoch report 2,700 sheaves. Wheat go out. Helena received letter from Henry by mail this evening. I received one from Samuel Bentz asking for money. 2 Patriot papers came this mail, the 26th, 27th, 31st, and 1st February. The 29th and 30th have been received by the Wednesday night's mail. Ned and Jupe in the boat. Very little done. Cloudy and looks likely to snow before morning. Priscilla here all this week. And then I'm going to read. John Blackford possessed a, quote, large collection of valuable books, end quote, said the Haggerston Mail, November 29th, 1839. It included encyclopedias, files of American farmer, and several newspapers. A set of American state papers, histories, the classics, and biographies. Among the latter were John Marshall, Life of George Washington in 5 volumes, and Plutarch's Lives. So this is why he's talking about his books and his libraries. Nicholas Matua and Matron was an elderly, poverty-stricken Greek immigrant, sometimes employed by Blackford, who occasionally gave him bacon and other supplies. He was a bad character. See entry for February the 3rd. George Nicholas, a Shepperton, hired himself and his slave to cut wood and do other farm work at Ferry Hill. Again, slaves were also rented out if their, quote, slave master wanted more income. They would rent you for a season, for a day, and then you didn't get the money, they got the money. Blackford held stock in Baltimore Life Insurance Company and had sold Hit a policy in his company. Elizabeth Franklin's Blackford wife had been on a visit to her father. I wonder if Blackford still has some people who are alive. Angel says accounts are interesting. I wonder what motivated the diversity of interest. What are they doing in that boat? The boat is the ferry. He invested, sis, in a ferry, Ferry Hill. And it's a ferry that is supposed to be transporting people across the river. And it would have been the mode of transportation of that day, and the people would have to pay. And so he's basically saying whether or not people are not using it or the enterprise is costing more than it's worth. But that is always on his mind for some reason. That, let me go up for a second, that the boat venture is not doing well. Hold on. And we read that earlier on. As it related to when they were giving us the setup of where he is and what was going on. It was Ferry Landing, again, the boat. And this is why a lot of people, he was like kind of on a crossroads, his plantation was. And if you coming and going, you would stop at his spot. Let me see if I could get a picture. Here, let me go down. Down. Where am I here? What page were we on? George was a young slave. Okay, Ferry Hill. Let me see if I can get a picture of Ferry Hill. And so that's what we read before. So for whatever, he was into wood cutting and selling. He was into the boat. Of course, he's into farming. So, and of course, now we see he owns stocks in different things. So he was taking some of his monies and diversifying. What they call it today is diversifying your portfolio. And that's what he was doing. And so this is an actual location. It's on the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal. And if you go at the national park, I'm gonna take you guys there right now so we can see that this is not just some way off, what do you call it? This is not just some way off conversation that has nothing to do. These places still exist. So we're gonna go over there. This is what we're reading about, and this is the man who owned it in 1838. So we're gonna see if you guys can see my screen. It says, this is nps.gov, National Park Service. I typed in Ferry Hill, right? And then you see here, this is the place we're reading about. This is the place that people kept coming and going. Ferry Hill Plantation. The river crossing at Pax Horse Ford, located about a mile downstream from Shepherdstown, we keep reading about that, could not meet the needs of a growing population. Thomas Van Swearingen, which is in the story we're reading, began operating a ferry in 1765. I believe Swearingen is who sold it to him. This location provided easy access to towns on both sides of the river, including Charlestown and Harper Ferry, Virginia, and Hagerstown, Frederick, and Baltimore, Maryland. In 1775, Van Swearingen had constructed a ferry inn at the landing on Maryland side of the river. The community that grew as a result of the ferry became known as Bridgeport. They got a Bridgeport in Clementary, by the way, but anyway. This is the plantation we're looking at over here. Ferry Hill Plantation stood at the bluffs above the canal across the Potomac from Shepherdstown, West Virginia. It says here, this is the dude we're reading about. John Blackford acquired interest in the ferry and adjoining acres through an inheritance from the Van Swearingen family when he married Sarah Van Swearingen in 1805. And which her name becomes Sarah Blackford, and this is why he keeps calling her Miss B. Sadly, she died at the age of 25. No, wait a minute, maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe she died and he married, and it's Elizabeth who's Blackford. And that may be it. I might be off on that. He remarried Elizabeth Node in 1812, and it was then that he built Ferry Hill. Yeah, Elizabeth is the one. Looking for an ideal location to build a home and start his family, he decided to build the house high on the bluff overlooking the Potomac River. The land was fertile, and the nearby river, which with a convenient ferry crossing, would facilitate delivery of his crops to market. Eventually, the farm would grow to 700 acres. In 1833, Blackford sold 41 acres, 3 wads, 1 perch, 5.5 yards to Chesapeake and Ohio Canal Company. John Blackford continued to operate the ferry. No, he didn't operate it. Who operated? Ned and Jupe. Okay, so we know in the history, this is on nps.gov, National Park Services. So we know the names of the slaves who was actually operating it, which is Ned and Jupe in all kind of weather. So John Blackford continued to operate the ferry. However, the canal would also be utilized to transport goods. As transportation needs grew, the ferry was proving inadequate. Franklin Blackford sold the ferry and surrounding property to the Virginia and Maryland Bridge Company in 1850. A toll bridge was constructed. So that's his son, I believe, who then took it over. It says it was its location that drew attention to Ferry Hill Place in 1861. Henry Kai Douglas lived there with his parents, the Reverend Robert Douglas and his wife Helena. Oh, so chill. They end up living there. They used to visit there and they end up living there. Interesting. When war broke out, Henry enlisted in the Army of the Confederacy. The Federal Army looked upon the family with mistrust. The family was held under house arrest for most of the war. They were instructed to keep the shutters closed. One stormy evening, a shutter was blown open. The Union officer saw this as an act of treason, implying that the Reverend was signaling to the Confederates across the river. Reverend Douglas was arrested as a spy. Although he was never formally charged, he was held at Fort McHenry for several months before being allowed to go home. Interesting. This is the history after it left Blackford. The property passed on to Nanny Cohen, a daughter of John and Helena, who with her husband ran a pig farm from 1914 through 1928. Times were hard, but the Beckenbaughs continued to struggle on. They opened a restaurant, but then they had to sell the property in 1948. Even after the sale, it remained a restaurant till 1974. Very interesting. This is coming into our time now. The link with John Blackford was severed in 1951 when the house was sold to Frederick Morrison. It provided a perfect location for a restaurant. Many students from Shepherd College recalled enjoying an evening of dining and dancing at Ferry Hill. It was during this period that extensive changes were made to the house. The imposing columns facing the rivers were added. The walls separating the kitchen from the dining room and the servants' staircase were removed. Oh, removing the sign that this was a slave plantation. Cool. Any addition was added to the back of the main house, and many of the outbuildings were torn down. Give me 1 second. Because of its location along the Shepherd, Sheep's Peak, and Ohio Canal. Hold on 1 second. All right. It says, because of its location along the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal, it served as the headquarters of the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal National Historical Park from 1979 until 2001. Historic Ferry Hill Place still stands in an ideal location, proudly overlooking the Potomac River, waiting for the next stage of its life to begin. This, again, is on a government site. This is the house here. This is the one that's redone, and this was an older version of the back of the house. So, and this is again at National Park site. So again, I say all of that to say it's not far removed. That history is all up and through there, and we're basically looking at John Blackford, the owner at this time that they're speaking about, and some of his business dealings. So that ferry they're talking about, yeah, that's pretty much Ned and Juke doing that. But let me release my screen. What time is it? 10:49. All right. We're going to take our time and work through this here. We are up to, where are we up to? I think I'm going to have to go back. I missed my spot. I think we're up to page 15. And so we'll pick up back from here. From page 15, yeah, I read he was part of the Baltimore Life Insurance Company, so he had stock in there. So we're on page 15, the third Saturday, and as we can see, he's going through the days of the week with no rest. It says, this information is great. When you have time for questions, I have serious questions regard to slavery. All right, Kyle, we're going to take a break here, and so you can ask your questions at this point as it relates to slavery. We'll pick up on the next session, episode 5 of the Ferry Hill Plantation. I think this is Lev Project episode 89. So for those who are just joining, we've done 89 episodes reading various narratives. Oh, I have a report for you guys while Carl is asking his questions. Kyle, feel free to ask questions. So if you guys can remember, we did some months ago, Alexander Falconbridge, who was the surgeon, the ship surgeon on the ships, and he was describing, if you guys can remember, the experience on the ships from a European's perspective. Now, do you know, I don't know how accurate this is, but a few days ago, somebody carrying the name of Falconbridge contacts me. or writes, and everybody could see it. They wrote it under there. And Kyle, feel free to ask the questions. I'm just going to read this to show you the relevancy of what we're talking about. I'm going to give you his exact name. His name is, he contacts me and says that he is a descendant of Falconbridge. Yes, baby. I'm coming. Just sit there. Sit right there. Let me get, that's the baby talking to me. Hold on. His name is Dave Falconbridge. I don't know how you guys feel about this. Because you know the investigative reporter in me wanted to bring old Dave Falconbridge on and have a conversation. You understand? But this was, and I said, let me ask the Left Project participants, what do you think about bringing Dave Falconbridge, who says that he is a relative? So this is what the person wrote 4 days ago. Dave Falconbridge says his wife Maria wrote the book, but it was based upon our Dr. Alex's, which is Alexander, experience on board the slave ships. However, he died of the very thing he was trying to prevent, diseases. And yes, I'm related. So I don't know the person. We've been doing the Left Project. We're trying to get understanding. I always say it's not one part of the conversation. There were slaves and there were slave masters. There were oppressed and oppressors. There are more than one narrative here. And a lot of times, like we're reading this journal from Blackford, we haven't really heard the fullness of their story. We just saw the actions, or our foreparents saw the actions of their behavior. So I said, interesting. You are a relative to Alex. Let me let you guys see this so you know that I'm, keeping it 100 with you right now. Let me let you see the comments. So he says here, right here, you see Dave Falconbridge. I say, interesting, you're a relative to Alexander Falconbridge? Question. In what capacity, if I might ask? This may be an interesting perspective for the Left Project. He says, his father, George, was a brother to one of my direct descendants. So his father, Alexander Falconbridge's father's brother was a brother to one of my direct descendants. The following words are from Dr. Alex and not from his wife's letter in the book. Falconbridge later recalled, when the Negroes whom the black traders have to dispose of are shown to European purchasers, they are first examined them to age. They then minutely inspect their persons and inquire into their state of health. If they are afflicted with an infirmity or deformed, or have bad eyes or teeth, if they are lame or weak in the joints or distorted in the back or of a slender make or narrow in the chest, in short, if they have been afflicted in any manner so as to render them incapable of such labor, they are rejected. Falconbridge, and we read that also, that not only were they rejected, there are some accounts that the capturers, which at this time would have been those on the continent from different tribes, melanated people on the continent from different tribes, if they were rejected by the buyers, which would be the slave ship captains, they would kill them oftentimes on sight, because in their mind, they captured you, you're no use to you. And so they would kill them in front of the slaver. So I'll continue. He goes on to say, Falconbridge becomes increasingly critical of the slave trade. In 1787, he left it in disgust and went back to working as a pupil with Bristol doctor. Soon afterwards, he met Thomas Clarkson, who, along with the Granville Sharp, had established a society for the abolition of the slave trade. Clarkson was given the responsibility of collecting information to support the abolition of the slave trade. Clarkson described Falconbridge as an athletic and resolute looking man. So this is he's saying this is his ancestor here. And this is how we did come across this information, because there was a time during the abolitionist movement where those who used to participate became what we would call today whistleblowers, and to kind of exonerate themselves and free themselves from the stigma of having participated, they tell all. So Alexander Falconbridge told a lot of information. And I said, thanks for sharing this information. My thought was to bring this person on to know more of what they knew. But, I found it interesting that as we are doing this work, people are searching for whatever connection they may have. And want to assert, because I had no idea you were out there or existed, and you felt the need to tell us that you were a descendant of this individual. So I just found that interesting, and I wanted to share. Kyle says, so I was talking white person from South Africa, and the topic of slavery came up. As the conversation went on, they said that other groups of non-color were enslaved bad, and that I shouldn't focus on one group. Why is this? It's kind of like the same thing for me, Brother Kyle. It's kind of like the same thing why people who say, don't say Black Lives Matter, say all lives matter. It's that same thought process that if I could dilute your experience, I could dilute your experience, then I won't have to deal with the reality of your experience. And it's not to negate the fact that, yes, several people across the millennia, across history, have been enslaved, but that is not talking about this particular subject. You understand? And so it's kind of a deflection in my estimation. And also, does white supremacy exist in South Africa even post apartheid? To my understanding, I had a friend who visited South Africa like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, and she said that the color coding system, you would meet people on the road and they would volunteer to you. They were clearly melanated, and they would volunteer to you to say, I'm white, because they have like what they classify as white, or I am not Black. And she said that she thought that was very strange, that why they felt the need to volunteer this information. So, to my estimation and what I know about South Africa, and a little bit I do know, it still exists to a certain degree. It still exists. So yeah, that's a good question. I do notice that a lot. It's like it makes people feel uncomfortable when you speak of the oppression. It makes people feel uncomfortable. And this is why I like dealing with these hard facts, because again, we will say Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass. No, we need to dig off into this information and get tangible, unrefutable, hard facts that this was the reality. You say it was economic, let's look at the economics. And this is no filter. You understand? Nobody really even cares about John Blackford right now. So they don't feel the need to cover up the reality of him profiting from the labor of free labor and using the money to diversify his portfolio and invest in other places. You understand? And so for me, to answer your question, I think it's done to turn away from dealing with the reality. It's kind of like you saying, you know what, I don't feel good, or I work really hard, and the other person saying, oh, you think you work hard, what about me? It's that kind of mentality. And furthermore, a lot of people, both quote Black and white, unquote, don't know about the realities of slavery, because just as though so-called Black people, a lot of their parents never spoke about it, a lot of the European parents never spoke about it either. There's a documentary out there called it was done on the DeWolf family. They were the leaders in the slave trade in the North America. So I'm gonna find that, because it was interesting how they made a lot of money, and actually they were brought to trial. Hold on. For some of their dealings, just look up, I'm gonna give it to you right now. The DeWolf family, DEWOLF, and we're gonna dig into some of this stuff because it's there, but it's not at the forefront, and it's our job and our responsibility to know our history on both sides. You understand? As it relates to what was done and who was doing it. And so with that said, we're gonna pick up page 15. We're gonna pick up, yeah, Kyle, brother Kyle. That's what I get from it. It happens all the time here. If you guys have 2 seconds, let's just take, this is a 6-minute clip. There are longer ones, but tell me if you can hear it, because the DeWolf family was involved in slavery. So I've never watched this particular one, so we're gonna watch it for the first time together. So here we go. We're gonna diversify this because this one is a kind of a hard read. We're gonna fill it in with some other information. Tell me if you can hear and see.
Hello, everyone. This is T with SayItInLove.com. In light of racist white people being duplicitous about our Black or melanated history, I want to post a series of videos that honor the unsung heroes as well as show the true history of how a lot of companies and people became rich. Take a look at this clip, and as always, I say this in love.
My DeWolf ancestors were known as the Great Folk in Bristol. There were professors and writers, artists and architects, and many Episcopal ministers. I was proud to be related to them. I was also drawn to this fairy tale world of old New England, these images of my grandparents when they were young. It never occurred to me to ask how we got so established. She also explained that the first DeWolf, Mark Anthony, came to Bristol as a sailor in 1744. And then she wrote, I haven't stomach enough to describe the ensuing slave trade. What hit me hard was the realization that I already knew this. Knew, but somehow buried it along the way.
We heard that word. I heard that word. And I still didn't think slave trade.
Well, if there was a sign coming into town that said you were entering Bristol, the historic center of U.S. slave trading, things would be very different.
What I'm hoping that you have been hearing is every single Black person that's talked to us has said exactly that. You white people need to talk to white people. That's what they've said.
I want to know what you mean by self-indulgent.
Oh,
What do you mean by
Absolutely.
that? Because,
Yeah.
I'm
worried about a bunch of white people thinking very hard about their ancestors and what the slave trade meant to them, and the danger that in isolation we can start trying to assuage our sense of guilt and shame because we've decided we've dealt with it and feel better about it, rather than dealing with the consequences, the living consequences today.
The goddess of this river, carry downstream.
Hey, hold on. I'm gonna find, and hopefully we can look at that whole. I just want to give you guys a little clip of that documentary. If you've never seen it before, I'm gonna hunt down the full documentary. That is the ancestors of the Wolf family. And as the woman was narrating at the beginning, she kind of knew, but she put it back into the recesses of her mind. She didn't want to deal with the fact that her family were slave masters. And not only they wasn't no mediocre slave masters, the Wolf family was big time slave traders. And so I'm going to hunt down that documentary, and in between us reading this Blackford conversation, we'll take a look at that, because this is what now, like they're saying, Europeans need to speak to one another concerning the reality of what they were complicit in. And so I'm gonna look. I can't remember where I found it, but y'all already know me. I'm a researcher at heart, so I'm gonna go find it and look it down, and maybe we can come back and talk about that at another time as we continue on with the John Blackford Ferry Hill conversation. So with that said, you know, we're laboring, but it's for a good cause. A lot of the questions that we have, a lot of the anger that some may have, a lot of resentment, we're having an opportunity to begin to resolve it. Kyle says, is it me, or are white folks just really bland, like popcorn with no salt or butter? Kyle is funny. No, I mean, it's a different set of people. You know, people have different characteristics. What I noticed in reading and learning more about Europeans from their perspective, I tell you the truth, some of the hardest books to read as it relates to this are from the European perspective. And one of the reasons for me personally is because their mindset is so different. And so when we're interacting as two different nations or nationalities of people, and we have certain assumptions, the reality is what I'm learning is they don't, like this man, they don't operate necessarily the way we do. A lot of us move by spirit. A lot of us move by inclination. They move by, oftentimes, not all the time, so I'm not going to totally generalize. I'm just saying from my experience from reading, it has to be something intellectually tangible. They have to be able to see it. If you're describing a spiritual concept, it's kind of like, I'm not feeling that. You understand what I'm saying? And so, and very meticulous and observing some of the very minute things that you'll be like, what? Why are you obsessing over that? And I see it even today, just in the mind. It's the mind. I see it even today. If I go outside and they may see, you know, the eyelashes, something as simple as eyelashes, and some of the verbiage, you know, oh, your children are nice, they're beautiful, and I say thank you, and then they'll say something like, oh, the eyelashes are to die for, and I'm boggled. I'm like, who would say, or why would you want to die for some hair? And these are the things that I personally don't understand, and I've been hearing it for years, and I could never rationalize. But again, as I'm reading more of their words from, like they say, personal journals, you know, the words that when they're saying when no one is around, or when the quote, Black people are not around, you know, and that talk and that conversation, it will shock you. It will definitely shock you. And it's not to say that, quote, Black people are absorbed of some of their behaviors, but again, our vibration is different. Like, you will meet someone and say, what's going on, brother? What brother, what sister? Automatically, and they will say, is that your brother? Because that is that your sister? I'm sorry, I don't remember. You know what I'm saying? But with us, it's more a fluid thing, because we move again from the soul. And those are some of the differences that I see in the communication, one to another. And we also see it in the culture, where a lot of the culture, even today, is being adopted. And don't get me into the minstrel shows, but marketed and adopted and absorbed from these same soulful individuals, which would be those of a melanated persuasion, let's say. And so those are very interesting. It's not about hate at this time. It's about observing. If somebody sees a green bean and a black bean, you observe the green bean and the black bean. What's different from the green bean? What makes the black bean different? You do it in nature. This is why you have botanical books. You have books that have highlighted leaves to see what leaf looks different from what. And some people don't like this type of analysis, but there is a level of truth to it when you look at the way in which things are done. So when you're in that intellectual world, where everything, where is it written? Where are your facts? How do you know? Where did you get that from? That is invalid. That whole dive and attempt to invalidate you because you cannot express to their standard of expression. This is where we're having this miss in communication. So I'm gonna look for this, in my estimation. That's in the Moon's estimation anyway, right? So you definitely let me know what you guys think, what your experience is. And again, I'm not saying all. What I'm saying is that there is some level of truth to this conversation. Just try picking up, like I said, read some of these slavery narratives or journals from their perspective. I still haven't finished, what's her name? It's so difficult to get through the way that every aspect of the individual is nitpicked. From the pores in your skin to the touch, every portion of you is broken down into some level of commodity or some level of something to be scrutinized. I just think it's wild. But with that said, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. This has been Amuna Yisrael. Praise be to the Most High. You know, Solonomics 101. We're gonna continue on. And we're going to pepper up this series because we do have a little bit more to go on this series. Let me see. We're on page 15. and it has 133 pages. Well, on the internet, that is. So we have 133 pages because it's a whole year. It's a whole year of his notes. So we have a ways to go. So we're going to definitely make sure this ain't boring. So we're going to pepper it up and make sure it's still doing what it's supposed to do. So with that, I want to thank everybody still sticking with us. If you have any questions or comments, put it under the video. If you will want to read, I keep saying it. All you got to do is hit me up. I'll give you the link to the Google Hangout. You come on the other side of the Hangout and you help read. So with that said, I pray everybody have a blessed night, and we'll talk soon. Shalom.